MJ is asking, hi, Stephen. I'm at that point where I'm relying too much on squinting to apply values. And which I remember you saying will make our drawings look too flat if we don't attach form to that application values. Uh, I hear what you're talking about, MJ, but that's not formulated necessarily as a question. Um, but I agree with everything you're saying. You know, like if you don't attend to the roundness of form, like in general, yeah, like your work is going to eventually appear too flat. Um, yeah, so whenever you're like putting values in, it always has to be like across the form. Like in this one, we have kind of light coming in here and light coming in here. So like if I start putting values, like light values in that intermediate area, it's gonna flatten things out. So I think 100% of the time, you know, form is at the forefront of your mind. Otherwise, you're gonna wind up making pictures that don't have form, which is that it's just a non-starter. I don't think you really can make finished work in that way. All right, so everybody's saying that the YouTube stream is fine. So and Jim Sketching says the original stream said stream removed, but after refreshing the page, all is well. Yeah, yeah. Anyway, whatever. Tech problems, but we're here now, and I'm gonna see if I can just get into the drawing zone because that is a safe place for me. Right. Someone asked if I keep a sketchbook, and let's see who that was. It was somebody. Yeah, Shaziz says, "Do you keep sketchbooks?" I guess in a way, like this is the equivalent of a sketchbook for me. Whereas I would say that no, I don't necessarily keep like actual books that I sketch in, but that's because you know my work is pretty much like studio based. Like so, I have you know my desktop set up that I'm working at here. I've got my standing H-frame easels over on the other side of the studio where I'm painting and doing other like demoing projects. So there's nothing really that calls for me to be particularly mobile. Um, yeah, so I don't keep sketchbooks. I think it's great, and it's also like situational. Like if you're in need of being mobile and being around, you know, if you're traveling to museums and stuff, get a sketchbook for sure. Or you're a landscape artist and you're like going out into the field. Like I think you know, sketching with into a sketchbook for your compositional studies is probably great. So for all those reasons, I think it's a really good thing. But it's not a practice that is necessarily like pertinent to my yeah to my artwork or my exploration. Like this is me. Like I wanted to do some Rodin studies, which is essentially like why this exists right now at all. Um, so like I said, it's kind of the equivalent of a sketchbook. All right. Let's see. Yeah, Sopan R says, I want to move from bark plates to plaster cast, but I'm not sure how to set it up at home. I don't have a professional studio. Any tips for a DIY shadow box for small apartment spaces? Yeah, for sure. You can even do something a friend of mine did. He runs a school called Liafa in Long Island. And it's a kind of like, I mean, you know, space in New York, you know, is going to always be a little bit tight. So he's got a lot of students to accommodate and a small space to do it. And what they do is actually they create these shadow boxes and actually hang them on the wall. So even that, like I think could be done uh, in a more space intensive way, which is to say you just hang the cast on the wall and hang your paper on the wall. And yeah, like you'll probably be technically, if you're doing site size drawing, you'd be drawing a little bit above life size, but it's probably the most space efficient way to do it. So you just have like your cast here, whatever, and your paper taped up here, and you can literally just draw like side by side. It shouldn't be a problem at all. Um, I think the real difficulty is getting good lighting on your cast. But you know, I mean, that's where when I've worked in apartments and like tighter spaces, it's always getting blackout curtains and making sure to like kind of block out all of the kind of excess stuff that, um, yeah, that can get in the way and kind of muddy the lighting situation that you're working on. So that would be my recommendation. Otherwise, there's a lot of, I mean, it depends on how much space you have to commit to it. If you have like no space, that's the option I would say to go with. If you have some space, I think, and you're able to like commit that, like dedicate that, I would say that you should make like a little podium that gets you kind of, a shadow box up to eye level, and then, put your cast into that shadow box. Get a good clip lamp and attach that above and to the right or left hand side, to where you can get that strong primary like light effect, or direction of light. Yeah, and kind of, yeah, I mean, but there's like a million setups for that. I think, quite honestly, it's something that, yeah, I mean, there's like a million solutions out there. The reality is, improvise, but there's also a lot of people out there that have improvised that you could probably take tips from. I've just always been like, all my studio spaces have always been quite dedicated, so it's always built out a lot. So when I think of, what to do with no space, it's like I just have to imagine that. Let's see. Andrew was asking, where do you get the source image? This one in particular was just pulled offline. And Arctic Monk is asking, any tips on sketching people in public and not coming off as creepy? Well, first of all, it's going to be about your like clothing and hygiene. I think in general, creepy people kind of give off a creepy vibe, not always because of what they're doing, but because of what they look like while they're doing it. So if you've got like a dirty, like oil stained t-shirt on and like big Unabomber glasses, and you're hunched over your sketchbook, leering at someone, then probably that's going to come off as creepy. But if you're nicely dressed, get a nice, linen button down, perhaps, a decent looking hat, probably wearing prescription eyeglasses is going to be a plus, at least maybe some stylish ones. And yeah, that's the best I can do. It's a really cool question, though. Let's see. All right. Madi Alizadeh says, who's your favorite sculptor? Well, you couldn't go far past this guy, past Rodin, who is, I think the sculptor that I recognized in my education as having the kind of drawing that most readily represented the aesthetic direction I wanted to go. Now, that's like a really big statement to unpack, but what I'm essentially saying is if you compare artists like Rodin and then compare that to an artist like Carpeau, for instance, who's another 19th century sculptor, except Carpeau is like far more academic. I mean, Rodin obviously was trained, but eventually his work became, moved into a much more expressive place, or expressionistic place, which is to say, like, looking at this guy, which is one of the burghers of Calais, it's Jean de Air. And he doesn't look, nobody looks like this. Nobody looks at all like this. But Rodin was, of course, trying to create this very real kind of feeling, right, in his work. And for him, that meant going beyond solely representational motivations, right? Like just documenting the appearance of somebody or something was for him not going to achieve the artistic aims that he had. And that gets you into that kind of qualitative conversation where you start saying like, oh, this or that artist, all they did was just represent what they were seeing. They say about Sargent, oh, he was just an eye, he was just eyes or whatever. Meaning that like he didn't twist or bend nature to his will in any way, and so therefore is not as great an artist as, say, some artist who did kind of change the appearance of things more for expressive ends. That was never Sargent's game. Like, he was never going to do that. So, like, expecting him to do that maybe was the fault of the person with the expectations, not of Sargent necessarily. So, like, I don't say, like, Rodin is a better sculptor than Carpeaux. I mean, there's probably enough people that would say that anyway, that I don't need to add to the chorus of individuals who would make that estimation. For me, though, it was just that his design was more like gripping, was more intense. And certainly in my youth, that was absolutely what I was after. So, does Rodin still resonate with me? I think so. And part of it is because for all that he did from an expressive perspective, he never like kind of shorted on the design, the drawing. It was always, in a sense, very believable work. It was not unbelievable. Like when you look at Willem de Kooning, making a portrait of somebody, it's unbelievable. No, it bears no resemblance to anybody that's ever walked the face of the earth, but it's still being called a portrait, so Rodin never departed to that extent that you felt he like lost his reverence for the pure representation, like, the appearance of a person as we see them, the form of a person as we see them. And for that reason, I think it still really resonates with me as an adult, rather than, when I was a kid, there was certain, I don't know if they're really a punk band, but certain bands like Melt Banana that, like, I can no longer listen to Melt Banana. Like, seriously, I can no longer like put it on and do any activity. Whereas, there was a certain point in my life when Melt Banana was really good and I really liked them. And there are some artists like that as well that I loved them as a kid, as a young artist, and then you kind of grow up a little bit and you start to feel like, yeah, well, it's not that you've left it behind or that you're so much better now and they don't matter anymore, but it's just it's not an ideal that kind of resonates with you anymore. And that's natural to happen. That should happen. In fact, there should be artists that appeal to you when you were young that maybe you can look back on fondly, but they're not still shaping your your aesthetic sense. You've grown a bit and matured and found other influences, and that's absolutely okay. Yeah, right. So let's see. A lot of questions coming in. Gentian Quelle says, "Hi, Stephen. Why don't you post a figure painting video in Patreon? You have none." Cool question. And it relates to, I mean, for those of you that are like at all these live streams, this is going to be a little bit of a review. Like, so a lot of you maybe know this somewhat. But Patreon has essentially a not safe for work setting. So there are people who, have like nudity or non-safe subjects on their Patreon pages. And as far as I'm aware, that puts you into this category where you have to put that list. And what happens actually is when you're putting out a link, to what your page is, and like, for instance, Instagram is like handing off to that link, it's going to have this additional query, which is there's like 18 plus content on this page. Would you like to continue? Which, of course, like, if you're in the world of working, making a living on the internet, you understand that things that stop people from clicking, anything that is like offering a resistance to someone getting to their destination, is generally something that you want to avoid. And so in order to avoid that setting or that option, I stick to portraiture. Now, coming up pretty soon, we're almost ready with it, actually. There's going to be a website called Atelier Forum. And that is going to be a website that I run. And so nobody that's directed there will have any notion of finding anything except exactly what I put there. meaning I won't be subject to arbitrary, not safe for work settings like I would be on Patreon, for instance. And that is where I'll eventually host figure drawing, and let's see, what the future holds, but eventually probably figure painting as well. So, there'll come a time, but it's a lot of hard work to get that stuff done. I can't tell you, setting up a website, like how many times I've been near to like breaking my keyboard and just walking away from the whole project. Tech is like so hard. Probably also because there's a little part of me that thinks I'd just rather be drawing. Can't I just be drawing instead of learning, DNS name server settings and like all this other stuff that you need to figure out for websites. But them's the breaks, and I'm not gonna complain for too long about it. MJ says, Stephen, your design is awesome. Who are your influences for your sense of design? I think every drawing or painting I've ever seen is a kind of influence. I'm a scavenger in that sense, that like I'm always, I'm going to a museum, like I'm always looking for ideas that I'm going to like integrate in my work. It's very much like a work trip, going to museums. You're kind of mining for these ideas and these concepts and these effects, which actually, and this is interesting too. So like things like natural history museums, right? At one point, natural history museums were used a lot by students, by students of biology or whatever other of the sciences that they were studying. They'd go there and use, and probably still do, use all these specimens as a frame of reference through which to express their furthering studies. Art museums, whether at their inception or just by virtue of how they are or what they are like places like that for artists, where you're going there and you should be, your antennas should be up. You should be paying attention to like the styles and effects and things that you're seeing, and also thinking about how they make you feel. We have this idea that a lot of art is kind of, it's either A, it's technical, or B, it's emotional. And that somehow, and I just say this because of like how the conversation around them is shaped, it's often that those things are looked at as kind of mutually exclusive. Like either the art is technically interesting or it is touching you emotionally. But I would posit that really, just like in a lot of other genres, like the movie industry, for instance, the technical and the emotional are inextricably tied, because you're using these technical means to further express what you are feeling and conjure up for other people in them that same feeling, right? That you're expressing what matters to you and showing what matters to you. But since we are representational artists, the means to do that are, of course, highly technical. You can't show, Rodin's Sculpture and what I feel about how much I love and respect this work without showing form. And I can't show form without the kind of technical means to do so. So if I degrade my technique in doing this, then I would also degrade, in a way, a little bit the message of this, which was an interesting debate that came up. So there was this, so we're at art school, and there's this lecture talking about Rodin. And of course, this lecture is like really solely just on the side of Rodin. Like, okay, you're a Rodin lover. We all get it. That's fine. That's great. But he eventually was using this kind of technique, or this, I don't know, maybe reflexive action that I find I'm not an appreciator of, where in order to express the greatness of one thing, he was working very hard to diminish another thing. So in order to express how cool Rodin was, he was going on about how dry and empty and bad Carpeaux was. And the further he got into this argument, the more it was like blaming Carpeaux for his technique and his kind of expression, because it was so unlike Rodin's. Where in reality, like, this is just a person who liked Rodin and didn't like Carpeaux, which is fine. Nobody says that there is some implicit nature that you must like Carpeaux. It's just not. It's like one kind of flavor. And so I remember bringing up that, like, saying, oh, that you mean, Carpeaux should have, he should have sculpted down. He should have, diminished his technical expression, so that he could better suit, the people that liked Rodin. And apparently this was a pointed question that was not too soon forgotten by that person. Anyway, the point is, I offended somebody by kind of pointing out this, what I feel is a pretty kind of, I don't know if it's obvious, but this bias that because one thing is good, another thing has to be bad. I just don't think that's the case. That's not how artwork functions. You can have like artworks that are good and artworks that are good in another way, and that's just how the whole show operates. Anyway, Shaziz says, do you do watercolor portraits or do you only paint with oil? I've been known to do a watercolor portrait or two, but I don't do any instruction in watercolor because essentially I don't really have any training as a watercolor artist. I just do it naively. I mean, I know certain things about it. I know that I want to be using the white of the paper as the highest value, and so it's all this process of like reducing value in other areas to get that expressive value. But other than that, no, I just do it for myself. Yeah. Let's see. Sopan R says, how do I self-assess my art for dirty lights? We're talking about lights like this. What happens a lot of times is people will see like value changes like this, and they'll start putting in really like dark values. But that just means that you're not comparing the darkest darks to this entire area. So if you compare, like, for instance, like the darkest area here to the darkest area here, they should be very vastly different. But this process of value comparison is not, it's not something, I don't think it's something innate. I don't think it's something intuitive. It's a learned behavior that is a part of a larger process of comparison and design that eventually allows you to avoid things like muddy lights. But there is no, it's not really like an isolated thing like, oh, if you just compare those, you will have it. It's all a part of a bigger process of understanding the larger planes and forms of the subject. Let's see. Hell Paradise is asking about paper. There should be in the bottom of this post a description that says something. Actually, there's not a description. This is part of like the crazy bonkers start out I had to this. I usually have an FAQs link in my in the description of the video that I will put on later, but was unavailable now. Oh my god. Yeah, that's Stonehenge paper. That's the bottom line. Let's see. Questions coming in. So I just lost my place in the questions. I want to make sure I get to them all in the same order that they came in. Let's see. Beth says, do you wipe linseed oil onto your palette after you're done using it? No, I don't. I mean, because I don't use paint thinners and things or solvents in my studio like at all. Sometimes I'll clean my palette with linseed oil, but it's not to treat the palette in any way. It's just like that's the only thing I have to clean off a palette with. previously I probably would have used mineral spirits, back when I was a student or whatever. But I've just completely cut mineral spirits or turpentine out of my process. Any kind of solvent, I don't use it. Not even spike lavender oil, not because it's toxic, but just because it has like a really aggressive aroma, and for me, I'm not like a big appreciator of that. So in general, I just don't do it. So I guess the answer to the question is yes. By coincidence, I do, but not for achieving any particular effect. Let's see. Thomas Wren says, "Hi from Sweden. I've taken a few courses at the Florence Academy in Mölndal. Good crew there." Yeah. No, Brita and Matilda, great people, great teachers. I think you still got Stephanie Kuhlberg. I think is still there. All really wonderful folks. Madeline Pater says, "I'm really looking forward to Atelier Forum. Approximately when do you think you will release it?" Ooh. Madeline, it's funny you asked that, because my first thought actually when I was starting up the stream today was, this is why I don't schedule things for myself. Because if I had about 20 more minutes to set up, this would be a totally different live stream. I would, whatever. Like I would have set up all the links and FAQs, and the posts would be on Patreon, and like all the stuff that I'm supposed to do would be done. But when we were recording, Cornelia and I were recording this podcast episode, we had like a lot of tech trouble at the start of that. There was like a lot of audio feedback. And so it just wound up taking twice as long as it was supposed to take. And so this just got like pushed and pushed and pushed. So all I could do was just get up and get streaming barely in time. So I expect Atelier Forum to be released in a matter of weeks, probably. But something could happen, and it could be, pushed till next month. So I don't have like a launch date yet, but I would really love to. As soon as possible, I would love to have a launch date. It's not far off. Like the site is almost prepared for action. But you never know when something like, I was mentioning like DNS name servers, and I've been having like a lot of trouble, transferring domains and stuff. So and that's supposed to be done in like X amount of time. So we'll see like whether the estimated time actually is the amount of time that it takes, or whether it's going to take like a week after that or something. It's just, you get into making these promises about stuff, and inevitably, it comes back and bites you a little bit. So best I'll venture is sometime soon is the plan. Hopefully very soon. Let's see. Just have to scroll back through some of the questions. Yeah. Vijay Kumar says, any tips on making a good value scale and gradient scale? How important is it if studying graphite and charcoal? Should we use different grade pencils or make it with one pencil only? Yeah, the one pencil only theory is one that I don't subscribe to. Like, the idea would be, right, that, so, we have all these range of pencils that we can use. We have, everything from a 4H all the way up to like a 6B or an 8B or whatever. And some teachers, in an effort to kind of simplify the student's life, right, will say, you know what, we're just going to use one pencil, we're going to vary the pressure. And, this is one way of thinking about it. However, in my personal opinion, as a teacher, or in let's say my professional opinion, graphite and different grades of graphite are like the tools of the trade, and I don't think they're really that complicated when you explain the mechanics of it, right? Like, so what do we do when we want to make like a dark value? Well, we choose a softer lead, so something from the range of Bs, from B to 6B, right? If I want to make a dark value. If I want to, model some forms in one of the lightest areas, I'm going to want a light value. So I use a really hard pencil, like a 2H or even an H. Once you understand that, like everything else is kind of just drawing. So the justification for saying we're just going to do it with one pencil, to me is kind of, it just strikes me as a little bit of an oversimplification, which I'm often very much in favor of simplification. Uh, but oversimplification, however, I think in this case is more of a hindrance than a help. So I think that we all should just, you know, yeah, just deal with it. There's some tools that you got to use. Use them the right way, and they'll give you the results that that they're supposed to. So, um, I don't believe in the one pencil idea. In terms of developing value scales and gradient scales, I know this is also an exercise that, um, yeah, that is recommended a lot. And I think what's happening when people are recommending that you make a value scale is basically that you get used to how to apply value to the paper in an organized way. And if you feel like really you're not able at the moment to like just get a flat value on the paper, I think an exercise like that could be helpful. Uh, but also like it was something I think I did once as a student, and then I kind of felt like, oh, if I just use that time drawing, I'd probably also learn some stuff. I mean, like making this drawing, I can't help but like I need to make flat values. And I'm also like a big believer in kind of situational learning where you kind of like you want to learn like on the job, I guess would be the way to put it. So I feel like studying portraiture is about like tackling portraiture. Sure, there's like some other, ancillary studies that you can do on the side, and maybe making a value scale is one of those. Um, but in terms of like tips to make one, I mean, it's just about really sharp pencils and using the correct hardness for the value that you want, and layering graphite always. MJ is asking, remember you saying studying sculptures as your third drawing education. How did you go about it, and what was that experience like? Mm, you know, it's maybe, uh, you know, I do call it my third drawing education, because in a way there were big gaps in my skill set that just were not being solved by continued studies in the same field or the same genre that I'd started out in. Like there were things about structure and things about design that I wasn't getting from the kind of projects I was doing, and so I started pursuing. In this case, certainly Rodin was a big part of it. I started looking at his work and just drawing it. I mean, to say studying, it kind of implies this, like I'm sitting at my books at night and drinking coffee at 3 a.m. and reading through the histories of Rodin's studies, and that's not really the case at all. Really, it's just working on drawings of those sculptures and attempting to kind of access as much as I could kind of his thought process, right? And so the experience, of course, was enriching, but I just wanted to make like beautiful drawings in the way that his sculptures were very beautiful, and yeah, and that meant a lot of time spent with them, spent studying them, looking at the intricacies of them, looking at the way that rhythms kind of flow through the form. I think also because Rodin was, and I hesitate to put it in such strong language, but was exaggerating some of the forms and some of the transitions. I think it makes so explicit, his thinking. That's really what kind of turned me on about it. What really I found like so fascinating in his work is how like laid bare like his thought process was compared to like a lot of 2D work is, it's, you get past this level of refinement, and then some of the bones of it don't feel like they're really revealed. Whereas in Rodin's work, that was all just laid out there on the surface. Kind of like, in a way, oh God, I'm going to get pelters for this, but in a way like Sargent's work, in the sense like that it is what you're seeing on the surface is what was there. Like the last things that he laid on, that's the painting that you see. And I feel like Rodin's work in that sense has that quality of being full of beautiful form, but has that quality of being slightly unrefined, which is very desirable. Yeah, I mean, we would just say, it has a quality of being a bit raw, which is very nice, VJ Kamar is asking if there's any chance of a short video on value scales. There will be videos and are videos on the conceptual sphere, which is the place that I would rather put those efforts. So if you wanted to learn about gradations and softness and value application, I think the best way to do that is within a project that is already referencing a sense of three-dimensionality or form. So when you're making a drawing of a sphere, right, it's a very, very simplified form in the way that creating a value scale or a gradient scale is essentially like it's a simplified version of what you might find in a complex subject. So making that sphere, it puts you in a situation where you're not going to be too challenged by the actual subject matter, and you can just focus on the relatively simple task of creating gradients and even values. So search for the conceptual sphere video on my website, stephenbaumanartwork.com. If you go to the Patreon lessons, you can find it there. And I think that's just, in my opinion, it's just a better use of your time than just making a gradient. A gradient scales and things, in my opinion, are a little bit of an oversimplification, and also, like I said, they're a bit removed from like practical drawing. Like there's never a time in a drawing, for instance, where all I'm doing is just making a gradation. I'm always making a shape or alluding to a form or like working on a contour. All these things, they're so situational that it's tough to think about them outside of their true context. Yeah. Let's see. Krizia Chan says, is doing quick sketches, like 5 to 10 minute sketches, really helpful? Yeah, well, I mean, hey, it all kind of, it's not so much maybe the time aspect as much as it is like, what are you kind of shooting for? I know that, for instance, at places like the Watts Atelier, that is like a big part of what they do is like get it on the paper rapidly, which I would say, probably, I mean, I don't think this is revolutionary for me to say, but probably if you're going into something that is a little bit more, I want to say like commercially or professionally intensive, like if you're going into to work at one of these places out in LA that specializes in animation or stuff like that, then those skills are going to be super useful and optimal. Whereas I don't have an occasion very often to need to do something in 10 to 15 minutes. It can be, hey, listen, it can be really cool, but it's not something like I encounter, super often, or I use super often. Yeah, I don't know. I just want to be fair to everybody. Like, there's an application for it. Is it useful? Yeah, sure, it's totally useful. But it depends upon kind of what you're aiming to do. I think if you're aiming to do what I'm doing, like I would say I've never been great at a 10 to 15 minute sketch, So take that for, I guess, what it is. Hell Paradise says, how do you make your highlights in your portrait drawings? I mean, it just depends upon the portrait, like if you're talking about some of my Patreon lessons where I actually use egg tempera in the highlights, then that's like a different story. But in general, you're just looking for like the, specular highlight, or alternatively the kind of larger, what's the word? Sorry, words escape me a little bit. The center light, the large kind of unbroken body of light that is representative of the plane facing most towards the light. So, you just try to gauge your highlights as best you can based on the value comparison kind of present in the drawing. And, after that, I try not to like over finesse my highlights. I want them to be like just to have a little bit of roughness to them, and let the refinement be in the graphite. And that more has to do with the fact that I think graphite is a little bit more of a controllable medium than what white chalk is. White chalk is a little bit unwieldy, is a little bit kind of less refined, or more difficult to refine. And so I tend to, enjoy a little bit more that kind of roughness in it. Whoa. A lot of questions. Hang on one second. I just got to go back to a little bit earlier. I'm having a tough time today, guys. All right. Seventh Sun 1 says, have you ever heard Aurora? Awesome Norwegian singer. I have not. I cannot say that I have. MJ Artwork is asking, is the goal of the block-in mainly creating a complex sense of design rather than values? The goal of the block-in is to create like an armature on which you can kind of make the rest of your drawing, which is to say that, you need to find a way to like place the features on the head and to create the proportion of the head without compromising the flexibility of the drawing, which usually entails, keeping your values light. So it's something that logically takes place at the beginning of the work. So just knowing like where the eyes are aligned, the nose is aligned, the mouth, like all that stuff, that's block-in related, and it should happen rather rapidly also. So is it, the question was to create a complex design rather than values. I would say that, like block-ins are generally not too value intensive for me. However, that being said, like right now I have a couple of commission portraits coming up. And actually even, let's say this as well. So next month on Patreon, what I have coming up is the advanced cast drawing lesson, which in a way, this is a little bit of a precursor to. But in a lesson like that, one of the things that I'm going to do is actually switch to, when I'm blocking in, to actually use quite a bit of a softer lead than I normally would. Usually I block in on white paper with like an H or sometimes a 2H, and then let the values grow from there. Because I know that when I'm doing a cast drawing with white chalk and graphite, the value work is going to be quite intensive. I kind of get that started a lot earlier by starting out actually with a much darker or a much softer lead that renders a much darker result. So your block-in can be a little bit more value-based, but in general, like I said, it's really just placement of features. The alignment of the subject on the canvas as well is another critical factor that you can do really well or really badly in a block-in. So just kind of taking advantage of all the opportunities that you have at that stage, I would say is really what it's about, whether it be value or it be just design. Yeah. Angel asks, do you finish all your drawings? When it's possible, I finish my drawings. There are abandoned drawings for sure. Sometimes not for a good reason. Like I done this colored pencil drawing. I've been working a lot with them lately, and I thought it kind of sucked, or at least like it wasn't my best work. And I was kind of looking at it for a while after. I thought like, Actually, I was wrong. I was just having a bad experience drawing it, but like it wasn't the drawing itself that was bad. So, uh, is that drawing finished or not? I don't really know. I mean, no, I definitely don't finish all my drawings like that. That's for sure. But it's for different reasons sometimes. Sometimes you'll start a drawing and like genuinely you just kind of lose interest in it. And of course, I got into the habit because of where I went to school. That like if you started a drawing, for sure you finished it. Like there was no quitting. You had to be passed by your instructor on the drawing. So like kind of they said when you were done. So all you could do is come into school and work on it. Like that's it. And then, you work and work and work and you try your best and eventually you usually, you come to a place where it's finished. So I have a little bit of that ethic in me still where I just kind of feel like, yeah, I'm always going to be kind of like finishing my work in a way. But it's not 100% of the time. By the way, yeah, just YouTube housekeeping stuff. Just like and subscribe if you think the video's cool, the content's cool. I know that this is a subpar stream because I'm feeling so distracted. But yeah, anyway, whatever. If you like the stream, give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to. Let's see. Arctic Monk asks, what other questions to ask yourself when studying artists? That's a cool one. I think that in general, when you're kind of, if we're talking about like you're at a museum and you're kind of looking at the work, I think that you want to look for, in a way, first, like what understandable things are happening, right? Because in work in museums in general, right, you're going to be dealing with like quite high quality work that is going to be there precisely because it expresses something, or a lot of times actually museums because it's historically relevant. So first you have to figure out whether you're looking at one of these artworks that is there because it's so amazing and moving, or one of these artworks that's there because it's historically relevant. After that, you can start to ask yourself, just study like the formal properties, right? Which is to say, the things that are there that you can look at. Like, what is the value scale that is present in the work? Is it a high key or kind of low key work? How does that make you feel? What effect does that have on you? How has that artist like dealt with that challenge of making a work that's all in the higher register of values, for instance, versus another artist that's working all in a lower register of values, like, and what effect does that have on you? So it's kind of cross-referencing what you're seeing and how that links up with how it's making you feel. And I think in that way we can start to maybe understand a little bit the connection between the tools that we're learning and the actual expressive goals that we have for learning them. I mean, there's a lot of, I think, good, well-made criticism about artwork and artworks that come out of academies, that they seem like they're so dry, that there's nothing interesting or cool about them. They're just like really well made, and I get that, but really that's not looking at academic artwork or let's say artwork that results from academic training. I don't think that's really being particularly fair to it. In general, I think that you have to first allow the student to like grow and mature and understand like how their tools can best be used. Like if you looked at the work that I made right after I left the academy, I think it was like sterile and dull and like not so interesting, but I was just trying to like adjust to my new reality. Like I was just fresh into the world. And maybe there's this expectation that artists are supposed to just be fully formed and perfect right at the start. But I know that for myself, I didn't make my best work as a student. I didn't make my best work as a recent graduate. It took me a lot of years actually to kind of warm up to what my job actually was. I mean, right out of school, I was I mean, blatantly unremarkable. I think that I was able to make a good drawing, but that was, or a decent drawing, let's say, but that was about it. You know, I wasn't like pulling up trees, as they say, in terms of my artistic level of expression. So I don't know. All the unfair things that you could say about academic art were very true about my work at the time. And as time went by, I think, you know, I was able to grow a bit, to learn maybe a little bit more about myself and about my life, and then, you know, translate that into work that maybe was more genuine, that had actually a point of view, and had something that was like worth sharing with the world. You know, I mean, that's another like weird position that you find yourself in, you know, studying art, is that like when I went to art school in the States, it was like, okay, now whatever, you're 18, you've arrived at art school, now it's time to like really make some art. And I didn't know anything about anything. Like, I was totally unqualified to make artwork at that time. I mean, it's almost comical to think that I was fully formed enough to, yeah, like I barely knew by the way, I didn't even know the grammar of a visual phenomenon, you know, let alone had the capacity to like express myself using it. And that sounds, you know, that's definitely not me being humble. And I don't think that you have to wait forever if you want to be an artist and express yourself. But just talking about representational tools and thing, I was far from ready um, going into college to do anything, I think, remotely worth looking at. Just my opinion. Let's see. Zoran asks, does value scales differ that much on different paper surfaces when using graphite or charcoal? Yeah, man, it's a combination of your surface and your medium. So so all that stuff matters for sure. You know, if you're working in charcoal, for instance, you have quite naturally a broader value scale available to you than if you're working in graphite. So graphite probably goes to, if the value scale starts at 1 being the lightest, 10 being the darkest, you know, graphite will get you to like a 6 or a 7. If you put like some really nice compressed charcoal next to your darkest graphite and you really grind that in, it's going to be like a couple values darker. So that'll get you to like an 8 or even a 9, maybe 8.5. And then if you put like a bit of black oil paint next to the darkest dark you can make with compressed black charcoal, you're going to see that takes you like all the way to the nominal 10, like, or as dark as you can get on kind of a well-lit surface. So yeah, it's all relative to like the materials you're using and the surface you're using it on. So if you're working, like for instance, if I'm working on a white paper, these dark values are going to look a lot lighter by virtue of the light value that's kind of coming through the graphite, and kind of like, yeah, giving them this excessively kind of lighter value on the outside, or in its appearance is what I mean to say. You folks do not know what a bad time I had setting up the stream. My goodness, I'm like still stressed out from it. Anyway, let's see. Anika Nandi says, if I study values with my reference edited black and white, is it going to ruin my skill? No, I don't think so. I think that's just one way to look at things. I mean, this is what you're doing mentally, is you're trying to isolate the value expression from the color expression, you know? And is it giving yourself a leg up, you know, making it a little bit easier? Yeah, I think it is doing that. But I mean, up to a point, you know, I'm not sure that it matters so much if it's like a little bit easier. I mean, eventually you're going to learn to see values well, and then it's going to be kind of irrelevant. So no, I don't think it's, there's a lot of these ideas like, you know, if I use a proportional divider, am I cheating? Or if I use this or that, am I cheating? I think aside from like tracing your subject, probably like everything else is pretty legit, you know? I mean, feel free in the comments to put in something that you think is out of bounds or is shouldn't be allowed, for drawing, and if it is, then I'll stand corrected. But I think, yeah, in general, there's a lot of different tools. Like what do you think we're doing, like with a black mirror, right? So students at the academy are all given a black mirror, which is basically like welding glass, and they use that to observe the interrelationship between the darker values in the subject, which helps them to see the compression of values. Now, I think that is just about exactly the same thing as, for instance, making your reference photo black and white. So again, I just don't see maybe that much of a difference. I'd be willing to be convinced otherwise, but it seems like it's fair game to me. Let's see. Yeah. uh, Ghazal Preet Gill is asking about like pencil brands and things. Again, when I was setting up this stream, I didn't get it set up right. Normally, I have an FAQ link in in the description of the video. If you go to patreon.com/Steve Bauman Artwork, the link is everywhere. It's on my Instagram bio. It's on my YouTube bio. All that stuff. There's a free FAQs page that is full of all the studio equipment that I use, the lighting that I use, like all that information is there. And so if I say I use a variety of different pencils, a lot of different pencils, a lot of different graphite grades and leads. So rather than doing all that on the live stream, I'm going to have to refer you to that FAQ post, which admittedly I have not provided you with a link to. But if you're watching this, you're definitely connected to the internet. Patreon.com/Stephen Bauman Artwork will get you there. The FAQs will get you everything that you're asking for and more. Shri Krishna is saying, what should I work with? I want to make a comic and I want to make the story so for that, I want to make a story that feels really, and want the viewer to feel more attached to the story. So I want my art style to fit it, but I want to make a style that is readable, and realism is not necessarily expressive with its emotions. I mean, I gotta say that there are out there in the world some absolutely transcendent comic artists who have spent their entire careers tackling exactly the kinds of questions that you're asking. I, however, am not one of those. I don't really have expertise in that area, so I would just say that unfortunately, I don't have really anything to offer in that respect. I would only say that skill building is fundamental in storytelling, because a bad skill or a underdeveloped skill is easy to kind of interrupt the story that's being told, or to distract from the story that's being told. So you do need to get up to a certain level of ability, I think, to be able to properly tell stories with your artwork. But that's about as much as I can say confidently about that. I mean, like I said, it's people make their careers working with those ideas. So I wouldn't want to diminish that by flippantly expressing some small aspect of it from a standpoint of not even really being educated in it myself. Oh wow, a lot of questions coming in. Let me see if I can get to them. Yeah, Limo is saying it's really hard to read Harold Speed as a non-native speaker. Like, yeah, it's not as like English as a second language. I bet it is. There's a lot of of course, important technical language in it. And it's quite necessary to kind of understand really what he's getting at. In his descriptions, the language of it is so important. But also, bear in mind that books are super cool and useful. And this is not me diminishing the importance of books, but just to say, like, also learning to draw is a practical problem, a lot of which can be learned outside of books, completely independently of books. So books are great, books are helpful, but books are probably the maybe second, or at least they are not the most important thing about learning to draw is not coming from a book. In general, it's coming from practice. Of course, the books help you practice efficiently and give you the right ideas to practice. But yeah, I'm just trying to ease the blow of of how hard Harold Speed is to read. Let's see. So someone with a really unfortunate screen name says, well, not unfortunate, it's just like, the screen name is Sad Idiot, so I don't want to call anybody that. So how long would one need to train in order to get a decent job in animation? Wow, I don't know. I mean, hey, everybody's so different. There are a lot of people that have been, in a way, like training since they were kids, like just drawing, these characters. So it's kind of hard to say. I mean, I think it's more like skill based, really. And so it's about how fast could you assimilate the skills that you need. So in animation, I don't know, but I'll say that, for what I do, for like representational painting and drawing, I would say to be at like a professional level with it. And this is hard because like different eras, it's kind of different. Like when I went there, when I went to the academy, Instagram didn't exist. All these like drawing and learning websites, if they did exist at all, they were very much in their earliest forms, and so not particularly evolved. So anyway, what I'm getting at is I think nowadays you can probably learn a lot faster because there's so many more resources to learn from. Whereas in my era, it was like, listen to what your teacher says, stand up in front of the model and just like do your best to get something drawn, and like look at the examples that they have at school. And that's about like kind of all you could do, which there's a strength in that. I mean, it's a strength in simplicity. You don't have like a lot of distractions. But also, it's a little bit of a limited kind of range of different resources to learn from. Annika Nandi says, how do you turn your paper? That's a great question. Actually, October 1st, in the video that comes out about blocking in for the advanced cast drawing, there's going to be a whole section on stretching and toning the paper. So I'm going to go through all that in that video, explicitly laying out all the stuff you have to use and the stuff you have to do. So I will refer you to that one when it comes out October 1st. JD Anarchy is saying, have you ever heard of Goltzius? He has a piece called The Faranese Hercules, which is amazing. His line work is incredible. I do not know that one. Feel free to send it to me, but I've not heard of it myself. Eirik Arneson of Sweden says, hello, Stephen. Why do you find it useful to draw from a sculpture? Is it clear structure, slightly exaggerated forms, or do you just find Rodin's work beautiful and fun to draw? Yeah, well, I mean, it's a little bit of all the above, it's maybe it's tricky to try to like isolate the one thing that you gain from something. Like, take for instance, like cast drawing, right? Well, actually, you know what? I want to even take this another step further back, because there's another kind of idea that I want to kind of express about this. So, I was thinking a lot about like connoisseurship, like in the way that there are wine connoisseurs, and everybody kind of knows this, right? That there is this next level to wine drinking where you're a connoisseur and you understand like explicitly the flavor notes that are in the wine. And there are people that are so specially trained called sommeliers, which they can smell and sip a wine, and they can tell you what region and what year and even what vineyard in that region. They can point you to just from their senses of it, right? And I was thinking a lot about, like, MJ, one of my students, asks me nearly on a daily basis about shape design and what shape design is and how you do it and how does it work and how do you get better at it, and just a lot of sorry, one second. Just a lot of questions about shape design and how does it, how to best assimilate that. And it occurred to me the other day that I feel a lot the way about shapes that I think about, like a sommelier or like or somebody who is a connoisseur of wine. I feel that in a way, this is going to be the most pretentious thing ever said on a live stream, and I just realized that it's going to be that bad. But I'm going to follow through and I'm going to say it anyway. I feel like I am a connoisseur of shapes. And by that I mean, I've studied sculpture, for instance, extensively. I've drawn Carpeaux, I've drawn Rodin, I've drawn sculptures from students at the academy, everywhere from amateur to professional, even just the forms of clay to study them and how light falls across them. It creates these very characteristic shapes. And I feel that in a way, like, these shapes are a kind of a taste, and your appreciation of them is an appreciation of a specific taste and of a specific type. And it's one of the things that makes us respond to Rodin or respond to Carpeaux. And that comes from the taste with which they expressed those forms. So what I want from Rodin is not so much just, yeah, it's a beautiful sculpture, I love his sculpture, but I want to go in and I want to understand the characteristics and the flow of each of these shapes, right? A mouth is a mouth is a mouth, but then Rodin sculpts this mouth, and what does he, like, take out of it? How does he, like, under or over model forms? How does he push, to the crisp edge certain areas to create highlights and really soften out other ones? Those are the things that I'm searching for. I'm looking at his taste in shapes, and I'm trying to get to a very, like, deep level of understanding and assimilation of that taste, so that I can interpret in my own way, right? The taste of shapes in my own work and in the subjects that I choose. So it's kind of all the above, but in a lot of ways, I think that sense of form and shape connoisseurship is at the heart of why I love to study these sculptors. Manakinu says, "Hi, Stephen. Bit of an odd question here. When you use colored pencils, how often do you have to sharpen? Or do you just have 10 pencils going once?" It's 10 at once. It's always 10 at once. When I have a cup like this, it's just as many pencils as possible. They're all sharpened. Sometimes if I'm having trouble sleeping, I'll come downstairs, I'll sit at my desk, and I'll, like, sharpen pencils. This is one of the saddest things I think I've had to say, but it's true. Eric Arneson says, "Are there other sculptures potentially useful to draw as well, like Michelangelo?" Yeah. I mean, hell yeah. Yeah, of course. I mean, if you look at the sculptor or the sculpture, and you find in it something that appeals to you, right? Something that you think, like, you really feel it. I've said this a lot about, like, landscape painting in a way, but it's also fitting here because it relates to how we observe things, right? Like, I've been at museums and there's some work that I'm like, wow, I'm, like, really appreciating this work. I really love this work. And I'll spend, like, oh man, I spent like 20 minutes, or half an hour just in front of that work, just really enjoying and appreciating all the aspects of it that I can see. I mean, yeah, that's a while to be in front of a work, but how long does it take you to make a drawing of something, right? Like, I mean, a proper study like this has taken me, I think, probably past 3 hours, probably closer to 4 hours, 4.5 hours. to actually make this study. And so it's that level of like introspection. It's that level of study and appreciation of something that I think is just not what's the word, accessible without, you know, that medium in between the two of you. You know, like you'll just never spend that amount of time with something unprovoked by the need to represent it. Let's see. Varun Tulsian says, what's your goal, if any, when creating a finished piece? Mine is to make illustrations that are magical. He says he knows that's pretentious, but something that a kid would be wowed by, a world in itself. Yeah, I think, you know, my goal kind of differs from place to place, from project to project, which is, of course, is natural. I mean, everybody, I mean, that's as much as saying like water is wet, you know, like, yeah, of course your goals vary. I just bring it up because like in a study like this, you know, I have this very particular purpose, a reason, a desire behind doing it. Whereas let's say like I'm working on a portrait, you know, a lot of times, sorry, there's like a little fly in the room. But a lot of times, like working on like an artwork that I want to make, it starts with like selecting the pose, in the sense that I select a pose based on a kind of expression. Like, you know, poses tell you things. There's actually something from the 19th century where there's actually a book about this. And it's what's called rhetorical poses. So academicians, as they are wont to do, decided that it would be a good thing to define or describe or codify a series of poses that are expressive for history painting, which is to say a very important genre of painting in the probably 17th, 18th, and 19th century. I mean, predominantly I'm thinking of the 19th century, but in any event, you have these history paintings. And in them, they're depicting usually like some either historical or like fictional event, I think. I don't know if maybe there's something technical that history painting only refers to actual events, but at any rate, they're these big orchestrations. And, you know, the poses of the people in those paintings are meant to convey or communicate not just something generic, but something very specific. And so codifying those poses made sense, at least as a starting point from which to kind of expand outward. Now, what this is pointing to is actually the thing that I want to get at, is that the human form, or the poses that can be found in the human form, are evocative. They show something about what you're feeling. So if you know, if my pose is I'm like going like this, obviously it's one of defense, one of protection of myself, one of fear almost, right? So I look for in the poses of the models that I have some kind of expression that attaches to what I'm feeling, or what I want to kind of express. And then I try to choose the means and materials that help best to express that idea. So in terms of like a goal, like my goal with this would be, as I said, just to extract something and appreciate something. Whereas in other situations, I want to eventually create a kind of expression that that people can kind of connect to. And a lot of times, and this is where, you know, I run into like some bumpy ground, is that like I care really deeply about some really, really academic stuff, which traditionally is not what moves the needle from an emotional perspective, right? So, you know, to me, a single shape, you know, can be like a symphony, like it can be incredible. And I know that that's not a popular or like easy idea to get on board with. So sometimes like I find an artwork that I'm making, like I kind of know it's not really going to resonate because it, like with other people, 'cause it's based on something that not many people are really looking for or not even looking at. And that's okay. I mean, I still make the work. That's just kind of what I do. But um, eventually, like if you really want to connect or communicate, I think that creates a need for something, some point of access, and that can be as simple as like color. Color is a great point of access for people, right? Because all of us, one way or another, appreciate color. I mean, if you're just somebody who decorates living rooms, or just has a living room, you have thought about the color on the wall and like how that color makes you feel. You like it or you don't like it, or you want to change it or whatever it is. Like that's you interacting with something that matters to you and something that is an access point for you. And you will naturally gravitate towards those access points in artwork as well. Let's see. Let's see. Kai E. Moffat says it'd be great to see you on Andrew Tischler's Creative Endeavor podcast one day. If it ever happens, I will definitely announce it. Rishkan says, when you draw, do you look at the reference or model as a 3-dimensional object or as a flat 2-dimensional plane? 100% of the time, it's about being 3D. I think that very rarely am I assessing a subject from a 2-dimensional perspective. I mean, beyond when I have the first like few marks on the paper, like at that point it's 2D. But as soon as possible, I kind of try to get into that 3D state of mind, just because it's so effective in helping you create a good, attractive, useful representational design for your subject. Without that sense of being 3D, I think the kind of wheels come off pretty easy. In terms of your drawing kind of fading a little bit into mush. Yeah, so I always try to think 3D as soon as possible, as often as possible. Let's see. Hang on a second here. 1 second, folks. Right. More questions. Danny Chen says, hi, Stephen. Many artists say it's bad to draw or paint from a photo, but many YTB tutorials are just copying a reference photo. I found that less creative. Is drawing a photo cheating in a bad way? I have a lot to say about this, right? So we've all heard the saying, or if you haven't, here you go, that a lie can make it around the world before the truth has a chance to get up in the morning. There are a lot of people out there in the world proposing the idea that working from photographs is either A, bad, B, not creative, or C, somehow a sin. I've not found any of those things to be true. I studied for about 4 years at the academy, and all that time, I always worked from life, and I found it demanding. I found it engaging. I found it fun. All those things that you want your study to be. That's what I found it. And it's very what's the word? It's very. It can be very, very rewarding. In terms of, is it creative or not? I think people just get a little bit ahead of themselves. They get really enthusiastic about an idea, and so they think that idea needs to blot out all the other ideas. Like, no other ideas can exist if my idea is going to be the special one. So they say, like, I want to make, kind of historical reproduction type work. That's what I really want to do. And so they say for that, oh, well, photographs are bad. And so, and you can't make artwork. Then pretty soon they're saying nobody should use photographs. And you're going, wait a minute, what? You're just talking about what you like and what you want to do. And you're trying to tell everybody else that what they want to do is bad because of what you want to do. I say, like, just take your ball and go home. Like, I'm just not interested in all this prattling on about how you can or can't do this. Um, like, just show me the proof. I mean, I could show you right now, 10 paintings that were done from life that look photographic, and 10 paintings done from photographs that look like they were from life. So, like, you tell me, what's the empirical difference? And I'm talking, in terms of what you can show me. I don't want to hear like opinions, philosophies, and things like that. Those things are great, and those can be the foundation for like so much great learning and great understanding. But when it becomes like a dogma that you're using as like a bludgeon to beat down other people's ideas with, nah, I don't even want to hear it, frankly. Sorry, that's my super hot opinion about that. Let's see. Is there no MJ Artwork is asking? Is there no even value ever been done rapidly? No, for sure there has. It just depends on the medium. With graphite, it's very tough. Marco Mora says, my portraits or realistic drawings have improved since I recently started watching your videos. Also reading 3 books you recommended. So thanks for everything. Awesome, Marco. Hey, you're very welcome. Very happy to help. Mborg 00 is asking, amazing point of the white pencil, tips on sharpening. Yeah, get yourself one of these X-Acto blades. Shave it down as much as you can, get some sandpaper, and rub it across until you get that conical point. Let's see. Mikhail says, my friend is a professional painter. He suggests that if you're a beginner, try to avoid using a stump. What's your opinion on this? Yeah, well, this is an advice that I think is based on obviously like a very good intention, which is to say that the overuse of a stump can often or does often correlate to an underdeveloped sense of value application. So you're using a stump to kind of cover up for the fact that your value applications are not particularly smooth or good. And so in that way, like, you can respect saying, yeah, well, stumps maybe, are a little bit of a crutch to lean on. That being said, 19th century academies didn't really have any particular problem with this. I mean, if you look in an exhibition of 19th century, figurative studies or cast studies, you see the evidence of the use of stumps everywhere. So I'm not really sure like when this became like a really popular idea, or who popularized it, but it's not something I find like a tremendous amount of like foundation in terms of like historical precedent or like immutable application, which is to say, like, it's not really true in all cases. Like, I use stumps all the time, and I draw just fine with them. So does that mean stumps are good? Like, I don't know. If you use them well, they're good. If you don't use them well, then they can be really bad. But that can be said of like any kind of part of your materials as well. Angel says, how has it been to move from the USA to Norway? Why Europe? Well, in short, in brief, it is because my wife, Cornelia Hannes, is Norwegian. And we always had a little bit of a plan, in mind that we wanted to live in Norway. We were living together in Italy, and we decided that, we had a great time, but it was time to depart. So we were going to leave our jobs, actually, and we were just going to go and live in Norway. But we had then an opportunity to actually just move our jobs to the Florence Academy in Mölndal in Sweden. So yeah, okay, we'll just keep our jobs. We'll move to Scandinavia, and we'll spend some time there. And then kind of the same thing. We were kind of wrapping it up in Sweden, and then there was kind of an opportunity to teach at the academy in the States when it existed there. And so we were like, well, okay, well, we'll move to the States and we'll just teach at the academy there. Also because, moving to Norway, if you've ever been an immigrant, then you understand that there are certain financial thresholds that will or will not allow you to move to a country. And for a long time, that was going to be like a really big problem getting into Norway. And it's not like tremendous. You don't have to be rich, but you have to have like some viable, stable form of income, which, like, for artists, stable is not the how you would categorize our income from artwork. It's highly variable. And so it was actually getting onto Patreon, which is basically, it creates for creatives like a monthly income that I was able to have like an application that would make sense for the Norwegian government. So we're finally able to move here in large part because of that. Because you need to like present, you need to present like a work contract. That's what they want. But for an artist, like, what do I, like, galleries don't have work contracts exactly. Anyway, that's why we moved here. But Norway is just great. It's like a nice, chill, clean place where you can, I don't know, go for nature walks and just in general, like, relax and live your life, I guess. Hell Paradise says, "Sir, can you give me tips for making highlights in portrait drawing?" Well, it's about laying a base and then like heightening it. So you see I have two kinds of white chalk. This one's a little bit dimmer than this one. So I use this for the control and this for the brightness. Let's see. Cat Aquarelle says, "Hi, Stephen. There were questions on Discord about starting art as an older person and the most efficient way to learn by picking a specific subject matter material and sticking to it. Your thoughts?" Yeah, like in general, right? And I think this might actually be related to like another live stream that I was talking about this. But I want to preface this by saying this is if you want to get really good at something as fast as possible. That's not always the most enjoyable thing to do. That's not even always like the route that you would like to take. But if you're asking me the question, how do I go pro as quick as possible? Like, how do I get a place to a place where my skills merit an income as quickly as possible? I will tell you that a lot of it is about eliminating variables. Because when you are adjusting to variables, you're not advancing in a direction. You're just adjusting to the lay of the land. All of us have like started a new job where we don't know where anything is, and it takes forever. Even just to, I used to work in restaurants, to find the ketchup. You know what I mean? Like, I just don't know where it is. I don't know where to get it. So I have to go and like, I have to go and find it. In any event, I think actually someone just tipped me in the chat. So thank you for that. And your name, I think, is in a language that I can't necessarily read. But thank you so much. That's really kind of you. But back to Kat's question, what I wanted to say was, if you want to get to that place of going pro as fast as possible, find a subject matter, drill deep on it, because there's not a lot of room. As I see the landscape currently, there's not a lot of room for earning money as an artist who's like pretty good at something. You don't have to be like at the highest level ever in order to do it, but I think that you do need, a certain degree of control over your outcomes. Being an artist, there's a phrase or a word that you want to use that is called being iterative. That means just making a lot of stuff. So when you're an artist, and especially if you're an artist that is only like a production artist, meaning like I teach as well. But if I only have to produce, I can't really afford to have too many failed projects that don't like get over the line. And so if I'm like changing the variables all the time, maybe I find out there's a paper, and by the way, this has happened a million times. There's some papers that are great to start on, but suck to finish on. So you can't afford those kind of experiments too often when you're a professional artist. Or at the very least, if you're producing on deadline, you don't want to find yourself in that situation. So pick an idea, pick a concept, pick a subject matter, and drill deep. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to be 100% in at the start. I would just say that I would just recommend against trying to be a landscape artist and a still life artist and a portrait artist and a figurative artist and someone who does narrative paintings and an illustrator. Like there's a lot on your plate, and those are different skill sets. Like all of those, even being a floral painter is its own kind of skill set inside of being a still life painter. So don't underestimate the depth of the challenge that you kind of have in front of you. Michaela is asking, what's the pros and cons of working on white paper versus toned paper? Well, pros and cons. That's a tricky one because it's I would just say that it's situational, unfortunately, I have to say. But like if you wanted a big value effect, right? If you want to make a big bright light effect, the con of working on a white paper would be that you have to add all the value necessary to get the lights to seem light. Whereas with a tone paper, I can just punch up the lights with white chalk, and I quite immediately get that strong effect of like glowing light. I mean, is that a pro and a con, or is that just the nature of the beast? Like that's just what it is to like draw on one of these versus drawing on the other of these. So I just think that they each are going to offer you something that you like in different places, in different spots, in different kinds of like techniques. So for white paper, I like white paper actually for sketching quite rapidly. Partly because like you don't have to produce a lot of value on the paper to like get a strong effect. Whereas like something like this, I got to push down into my like 4Bs to get a value that really like a dark value that really stands out. So I guess that's a kind of sort of pro con, which is to say that like if you have tone paper, you got to use like quite a bit of a softer, darker lead to get a value effect out of it. Whereas on a white paper, you get it pretty fast. Yeah. Let's see. Kevin Chopra says, I'm discovering ways to adopt existing methodologies and adapt them to my style. That's the good stuff, Kevin. Let's see. I'm getting some affirmations saying, damn right, Stephen. I'm not sure what that's in relationship to, but I appreciate your enthusiasm. Hell Paradise is saying, can you give me tips for drawing highlights in portrait? Yeah, I already kind of did that one, but Squares says, using photo references is okay. Who cares? But tracing, well, I don't know. It's okay, but where's the fun? It's like making crosswords with the solutions. Yeah, I kind of get that. But more so than that, it kind of it just kind of stunts your ability to like assimilate design lessons. You know, because like there's all this stuff that happens underneath when the drawing that looks like this that contributes to the drawing looking like this, and you just don't get that if you never have to search for it. Let's see. MJ Artwork says Harold Speed did have a problem with stumps, though. Did he really? Is it coming from Speed? Give me the sentence. I'd love to hear it. Let's see. Mark Tan says, "Wait, I just realized this live stream is in 4K. I didn't even know that was possible." Yeah, it's really about whatever. It's about the stream data input and output with the software that I'm using. Yeah, it is possible. Danny Chen says, thanks, Stephen, for the hot take about using photos. Indeed, I was afraid it was a sin to draw from a photo. I guess it's time to be free from that sin. Yeah, you know, it's just, and let me give you the balance. Let me give you the other side, right? When you're a student, it is ideal to study from life, partly because it forces you to see past the immediate impression of something, right? You need to like be able to adjust yourself to the model moving, and so to have a certain amount of like breadth in your drawing. Whereas if you're working from a photograph, literally, you can copy from one to the other, 2D to 2D, right? You can just literally copy shapes. So it never really forces you to think 3D. However, I would just say in response to that like looking at something in 3D and analyzing it in 3 dimensions, it's really it's an intellectual process. It's not something, I mean, yes, you can like go around the model and look around the model, but you can also, in a sense, look around the structure of the subject by studying structure and basic structure and form. Like these concepts exist, and it's not rocket science, it's just methodology. So yeah, like I said, I just think it's like a convenient argument. And the other thing, like, is it sounds really good. This is the other thing that, frankly, pisses me off about the photography argument. Which, by the way, I'm offended that I even have to take a side about it, because, like I said, I love working from life. It's not that I dislike working from life. I did it for many, many, many years. Is that it puts people that are working from photographs in this defensive stance, like, just saying, oh, well, like, oh, it's bad to work in photographs, then I have to explain to you why it's not. shouldn't have to explain myself. This is my process. Like, if you don't like it, that's great. You know what I mean? But don't give me this ham-fisted, moralistic argument about, it's not right in the monoptic lens and like all this stuff. I just find it really tedious. Sorry to anybody out there making those arguments. I don't mean to offend you. Let's see. Pads is asking, I'm into illustration most of the time, have to work from the idea and fusion of reference and client thoughts. Yeah. What's your thoughts on building an idea with reference and keeping it your own and fresh? Yeah, this is an interesting one because it kind of goes into, some of the things that you have to do as a commission artist, right? Like working on a portrait commission is like a collaborative process. And so the expression is not 100% your own. Which, by the way, like eventually I think I'm going to come out with a lesson about doing a commission properly and like the communication that's necessary for that, because it's not something I think comes natural. It's like I don't know about tips, but there's a way to comport yourself that is better for you and it's better for the person commissioning as well. And if you're just starting out, probably you don't really know how to do that in the right way. So there's a lot of guidance I feel like I can kind of offer about that. The short version of it is it's about like communication. Like any good collaborative project is about, managing expectations and communicating the whole way through, and having a process, and just as importantly, the contracts that make sure that communication is explicit and understood. So in terms of like making it your own, I think in some ways, and this is where a lot of people will get into trouble with commissions, is that they think that they have to take themselves out of it. Whereas in fact, the only way to, I think, successfully make a good commission is to make sure that you're 100% into it. Because I'll tell you right now, the time I'm most likely to make bad work is when it's work I'm not really interested in making. And so not for the client even, but I mean also for the client. It's important that you are like making sure that you're invested in the project. Part of that, investment, obviously, part of that interest is derived from the payment that you'll receive. I mean, that's why you're doing the commission, is to be paid to do it. But you also need to deliver, and that means enthusiasm. Because that's why they found you in the first place. They loved your artwork, and your artwork was conceived through your enthusiasm. So to try and do a commission without that, I think is, it's, I was going to say, it's really dramatic today. It's suicidal, but it's not. It's not suicidal. It's just kind of, it's not productive. Yeah. Let's see. Mikhail is asking, in this particular drawing, use the tone paper as the halftones, right? Yeah, pretty much. Whatever sits in between the highlight in this is kind of the halftone. However, yes, in a sense. But I'm also not afraid for the graphite and the chalk to touch. That's okay too. Let's see. Jim Sketch Testing says, do you pay attention to pencil direction when shading core shadows, such as on the brow ridge in your drawing? I just try to, in those instances, like it's kind of a listen to your gut kind of thing. It's like if you trained well, like stuff like that kind of comes along. So by paying attention to it, I mean, no, I'm not like consciously on a level like thinking about which direction to hatch. But everything that happens on the paper is the result of like, practice and conception and concentration and study and all those things. So eventually, like, yeah, it's a part of training, even if it doesn't result eventually in like a conscious decision making. If that makes sense. Let's see. Wait, there's some more questions coming in. Lou N is saying, how much time does it take to create such a artwork? Maybe this is around like 4 hours or so of drawing, and maybe like probably an hour of that was while live streaming, so not too concentrated. Angel says, someday a sketchbook tour, please. Apart from the Proco video. Thanks for being such a great inspiration. I totally hear you, Angel. I'm on it. Let's see. Lou Ann asks, when did you start drawing? Did you attend an art school? I started drawing, I guess, when I was very young. But I almost look at, now that I know what I know about learning to draw, it kind of reframes a little bit what I did before I learned to draw. Because I think when I was a kid, I kind of was led to believe or kind of understood through some hive consciousness that drawing was just like a thing that people did. Either they did it really good or they didn't do it good. And that was just kind of how it was. And you could work at it, but it was just a kind of a, throw yourself at it and see what happens. But then, like I went to school for it the second time. I went to college and didn't learn much about it. But then I went to an atelier and I learned drawing and painting properly. And you go like, oh, there's all this stuff that's just like a technical hurdle that you need to get over. Like it's not, it just has to do with like knowing what the thing is and then practicing the thing, which sounds like really simple, but that's kind of what it boils down to. So I've been drawing since I was a kid. But I've been drawing representationally as an educated artist since I was 24. So that's when I kind of started my proper drawing education. Which was really, by the way, like a great thing to, like, it was a light bulb moment to understand that, like, oh, it's just learning the right way to learn the stuff and then just doing a lot of it. Like, oh, that's what it is, It's not rocket science or some innate ability. Let's see. JD Anarchy says, the only problem I've ever had with drawing from photos is getting stuck just drawing from photos and not being able to branch out and do more from imagination. Yeah, imagination is a tricky one. And it's its own. Here's the thing. There's all this thinking, right? That, once you learn to draw, then all things that have to do with drawing are available to you. That if you can draw, then you can draw from imagination. Or I mean, like, maybe other people don't think that, but I feel like there's a pretty fair part of the population that's just going like, oh, drawing is just drawing. And if you train to draw this way, like, surely you can just draw that way too. They're all like independent skill sets. And for sure, if you learn to draw only from drawing from photographs, you're going to have some gaps in your understanding of things. The good news is gaps are there to be overcome. Like, that's why you identify them, so that you can fill them and get better and do more of, do a better version of what you're already trying to do. But they exist for sure. Like, there's no denying that there's some demanding aspects to like working from life that, are gonna come just from that, not from any, substitute for it. But I mean, the other thing too is that, like, none of this is closed to you. You can learn, to do one and the other. And I think that in a way they're not enemies of each other. I think that, even when I was a student and I was working from life, 6 to 8 hours a day, in my studio at home, I'd come home and I'd work from photographs, and then I'd go back to school and I'd work from life. I don't know. It's a big hoopla over, I'm not sure what. Yeah. Let's see. MJ says, at the height of that movement, line drawing went out of fashion, and charcoal this is all right. Yeah. So this is the quote from the Harold Speed book. At the height of that movement, line drawing went out of fashion, and charcoal and an awful thing called a stump took place of the point in the schools. The less said about the stump, the better. This again comes down to divergent philosophies about drawing, and it's always important to just take a grain of salt and say that this is Harold Speed's opinion, and that there are other equally convincing opinions in the alternative. This is another thing that I always find, kind of fascinating about, rhetorics, which is what we're talking about here. This is a rhetorical argument that he's making or would be making against stuff. He's not even actually making the argument here. He's just saying it's bad. But were he to make an argument, he would likely be very convincing in doing so. But convincing doesn't make it true. You can make very convincing arguments for things that are entirely untrue. Just look at all of human history to find myriad examples of this taking place. The important thing is to test these theories out, to try to understand through experience and through research what the facts of the matter are. Now, in things such as the arts, you're going to have to do it, I think, a lot of times to really get to the heart of the matter. It's just Harold Speed saying the stump is bad. What does that really reveal to you? That reveals to you the beginning, the hypothesis. You need to go out there and prove whether you think that it is right or it is wrong. So books, again, are great, and everybody sounds like the most convincing person in the world in the book that they wrote. Why would they sound otherwise? But it's not for them to make the opponent argument. But at the same time, again, you have to be the fact checker in that situation. Let's see. JD Anarchy is saying, so when is the next skull sketch? What about next Wednesday, man? Let's do a skull sketch. So Kawaii Ninja says, I have a tendency to always have my portraits always looking in the same direction if I'm not super conscious of making sure I switch up the pose. Yeah, I mean, hey, that's what happens. Anytime that you slip into that autopilot, it's an opportunity for whatever biases you have to kind of express themselves. This is why I'm always so big on observations. I just feel like, my imagination is in one sense finite. It is limited to the things that I'm able to imagine at that time. Whereas, even just taking something like this Rodin sculpture, I couldn't have imagined the kinds of shapes that he flows through here with. They're so specific, they're so particular. And that's what I love about like the visual world, is that there's this sense of like discovery in it, right? I go on a hunt in a way for these shapes, and it's satisfying to conjure them up from the subject. But I think we've been here a couple hours, and I'm not gonna lie, at the early part of it, I was super stressed out, so I'm even more tired than usual. But it was a good time chatting with everybody. There's some great, really, really cool questions. So thank you all for checking it out and for staying as long as you did. Please just remember to like and subscribe. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. That really helps me out. And if you're interested in doing this stuff, patreon.com/StephenBaumanArtwork. All the lessons are there, and it's super inexpensive. Next month, we're starting advanced cast drawing, which is kind of going to be like this, but even more intense. So be ready for that on October 1st. I'm going to be putting out the stretching and toning videos and the preparatory information probably sometime in the last week of this month. Don't forget as well that Patrick Burns' portrait drawing tutorial disappears after this month and will eventually go over to Atelier Forum, but at a much higher price than what you're paying to subscribe to Patreon and check it out. Anyway, folks, people, thank you so much, and I will see you next Wednesday at 4 p.m. Oslo time, when I will be much better prepared for the live stream. Anyway, listen, take it easy. Take care of yourselves.